Wisden are proud to partner with RIVERSTONE Living for our Ashes Daily podcast. From beautiful London apartments to 5-star service and a thriving community, RIVERSTONE is all about staying independent and inspired. I went along to their Fulham residence last week and I can confirm their facilities are incredible. Head to www.riverstoneliving.com and get in touch with them for a tour today. Hello and welcome to this bonus podcast, 2 days out of the second Ashes Test match. 2 bits of breaking news for you. Will Jacks is in the England Test 11 and Usman Khawaja has been ruled out of the Test for Australia. I'm Yaz Rana, and with me this morning from Melbourne is Matt Roller. Matt, let's start with Will Jacks. He's in an England 11 for the first time in 3 years. Why is he back? No one was even talking about him as a possible Test option as short as 3 months ago.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I suppose there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. One is that England have spent 2 years trying to blood Shoaib Bashir specifically because of the fact he has all the attributes that they felt were required for an Ashes tour, and now they seem to have thrown that out of the picture when they've actually got here. They've not picked him for the first Test, and now they are picking a spinner, and it's someone else entirely. The other way to look at it, I think, quite simply, is that they've decided to bring in a spinner, and they've thought that within the context of a pink ball game and B, having 4 fit fast bowlers ready to go, that they're going to get more all-round value out of Will Jacks as an all-round option at number 8, who gives them a much longer batting lineup than either Bashir or going with Josh Tongue as the 5th seamer. I think it's actually, I quite like it. It's probably what I would have done. I think there's obviously an element of the unknown on it. Jacks is not an experienced first-class cricketer. He's only played 57 games over quite a long period of time, only played a couple of tests. And there's still a slight feeling, I think, at international level in white ball cricket that the idea of Will Jacks has probably been better than the reality. If you look at his actual stats, I mean, he's only got 6 ODI wickets and 3 T20 wickets. So his spin bowling is not the finished article by any means, but England will probably be looking to rely on their seamers heavily again and be looking for him to contribute in a not too dissimilar way, actually, to if you look at the last pink ball test at the Gabba, to the way that Kevin Sinclair did for West Indies, where he got a 50 in the first innings batting against the old ball and took the wicket of Usman Khawaja.
Does this signal a slight change in how England are constructing their 11s? It feels like in the early years of Stokes and McCullum, not a lot was put on lengthening the batting order. Everything was about making sure you got the best chance possible of taking 20 wickets. Is this a reflection of what they think conditions will be like, and that actually you can get away with 4 bowlers in I suppose, I don't know. I wouldn't say that Will Jacks is a part-timer, but I also wouldn't say that he's a frontline spinner either.
Yeah, I guess he's probably slightly unusual in being a part-timer, and I know there's obviously some terminology stuff there, but in that I'd say he's quite an attacking spinner for someone who isn't a frontline spinner. Like, he does try to spin the ball. He's not your sort of white ball darts bowler like a Dan Mosley or someone trying to bowl 65 miles an hour. He does actually look to flight the ball. He obviously has the same attributes to some extent as Bashir, in that he's very tall, bowls from a high release point, all that sort of thing. I definitely agree with the point about lower order runs. I think if you think back to sort of the early days of Stokes and McCullum, you had occasions where Stuart Broad would be batting at number 8. And I suppose it might partly also be a reflection of the fact that obviously, they've had that safety net almost of Chris Woakes at number 8 for a couple of years now. Whereas with him gone, much as Atkinson and Cast did had a decent swing in the second innings in Perth, it has been a slightly longer tail, and I think particularly if you had Tongue or Bashir, they're not going to contribute a huge amount either with the bat or in the field. So yeah, I think it is probably a slight change in philosophy, as you say, and in terms of approach to selection generally from England. But I suppose they have evolved as those 3.5 years have gone on, and if there's ever a series for pragmatism and just trying to win the next test based on the specific conditions in front of you, it's at 1-0 down in a pink ball game.
And is pragmatism the word also for how they're currently viewing Shoaib Bashir? He's been the number 1 spinner basically from when he made his Test debut down in India in early 2024, in the side pretty much the whole way through until he gets injured at Lords. His last moment in an England Test shirt is taking the winning wicket at Lords, that of Mohammad Siraj in that epic game earlier in the year. Do you think that they are now looking just immediately at the short term, and Bashir, they hoped he'd be the finished product or closer to the finished product by this point. But there's a slight realization that there's probably work to be done there.
Yeah, I would say there's probably still a world in which Bashir will play a decent part in this series. I know he's not going to take part in the first two tests, but I wouldn't be shocked to see him come back for either in Adelaide or maybe even Melbourne down the line. I suppose the reality of the fact is that he hasn't played almost any cricket in the past. We're in early December now, and he's not really played since end of June, start of July. He didn't do particularly well at all in that Lilac Hill game. I suppose the curiosity maybe is that he was named in that 12 last week, where he always looked pretty unlikely to play in Perth, but that felt like a bit of a signal that he was ahead of Jax in the pecking order and that Jax was, pretty much in the squad as backup. So it's interesting that Jax has managed to leapfrog him, seemingly on the course of, over the course of a couple of training days. But yeah, I think the reality is that if you're going into this test with Sher Bashir, I mean, if you remember the Gabba test in 2021, where David Warner sort of did his best to hit Jack Leach out of the series, you could see a world where something similar could feasibly happen to Bashir in a way where, if it happens to Jax, he's obviously bowled a lot in white ball cricket, and is probably slightly better able to cope with the idea that he can contribute somewhere else and that he's still going to go out there and try and score some runs. Whereas, if Australia get on top of Bashir and hit his first 5 overs for 35, then that could be curtains for him for not just the test, but for a couple of games.
Yeah, you mentioned that Will Jack hasn't played loads of first-class cricket recently. I guess a bit of context around that. Because he's a very good and in-demand white ball player, he doesn't really get the opportunity to play a huge amount of county championship cricket for Surrey. If you're an IPL player, you miss a good third, almost half of the season at the start. And also a lot of England's white ball games in the last few years have tended to coincide with county championship stuff. If you rewind 3 years, the last time he played a full part in a championship summer, he was arguably Surrey's MVP as they won the championship. He averaged 54 with the bat. And though he didn't take loads and loads of wickets, only Jordan Clark and Dan Worrell bowled more overs than him. So he was certainly trusted by Gareth Batty to bowl a large volume of overs. And I guess as well, when you're looking at the differences between Jax and Bashir, Jax just has more experience of bowling when batters are really, really targeting him. And if that is the way that Australia choose to go against him, that could be important. Matt, on Australia, Usman Khawaja has been ruled out of the test. How do you think they'll replace him at the top of the order? Travis Head up top again?
It's a really interesting one because of the fact that they've floated a few times now. And I think it's clearly been something that they've been mentioning behind the scenes for a couple of years, but they've now spoken about it publicly. But this idea of potentially using different openers in different scenarios and innings. And I think a pink ball game actually really brings that to the fore. So I think the obvious and sort of easy answer is to say Head goes up top, where he did so well last time, and Webster comes into the middle order. But there is a part of me thinking that maybe, particularly after, in admittedly low-key game against the England Lions a week or so ago, Josh Inglis scored 100 opening the batting. Could you potentially go with Weatherald and Inglis opening, or sort of carded to open, with the prospect of maybe chucking Head up the top in particular circumstances, depending on when the first innings is, depending on when Australia are batting, whether it's in the sort of fabled twilight zone where it's a bit harder to see the pink ball under floodlights. Marnus Labuschagne spoke to the press yesterday, Australian time, so on Monday, and said he was, he effectively sort of locked himself and Steve Smith in as number 3 and 4, and said there was no chance that either of them would be moving anytime soon after how it went for them in Perth. So I don't think there's much appetite from either of them to be shuffling up. I like the idea of Inglis coming in as a sort of almost like a low value wicket and being an option there. I think the Webster route is probably much more likely. But yeah, I think there's clearly, I think the pink ball element does mean that it's a more difficult decision than it might be otherwise, because I think Head doesn't have a great recent record in pink ball tests. I think he struggled against West Indies in that Brisbane one anyway. And probably more to the point is, openers have struggled generally in pink ball games. If, for example, Australia's innings starts at 5:30 p.m., 6 p.m. local time when the ball is hardest to see, then there might well be a temptation to think, actually, we'll keep him for the old ball when it might be daylight, and we'll send someone else up top.
quite a good position to be in for Travis Head. Just you bat when it's as easy as possible. I'm also amazed at how many mentions Kevin Sinclair's got in the pod in the last 24 hours. Someone who I don't think we've mentioned at all ever. And he's been mentioned a few times. But it's reason why. It's because that West Indies Test match is the only time Australia have lost a pink ball test on home turf. And yeah, we talked a lot about it on yesterday's pod in terms of how difficult it is opening full stop whenever it is against the pink ball. And how actually,
yeah, I think I think one of the interesting dynamics in pink ball tests actually that I've sort of there's part of me that thinks that we massively sort of overthink the whole thing, and I think that the sort of main case in point for that would be that Ahmedabad one in 2021, where all of the build up was about Chris Silverwood talking up Anderson and Broad and how well they were bowling in the nets and they were going to be unplayable in the twilight. And as people will remember, what actually happened was Root took 5 for 8 and India's spinners took 19 out of 20 wickets. I think that was an even shorter test match in terms of sessions than Perth. I think that was over by tea on day 2 or dinner on day 2. So I think there is obviously that element of, maybe sometimes we do overthink the pink ball aspect. And we'll probably talk about conditions across this test match week much more so than if it was just a red ball game. That said, there are clearly dynamics at play. Players clearly think about it, and I think much as I don't think the sort of perception around the twilight zone is necessarily borne out in ball tracking in terms of I don't think the ball actually swings more at that time. I think there is a real phenomenon where, because of the visibility and because of the fact that you are sort of going from tracking a darker object on a lighter background to a lighter background on a darker background, all that sort of thing. I think that is a real phenomenon, and I think that you do see that borne out. But yeah, I think, as you say, I think Head could be in an absolute luxury position where maybe they'll just say, well, this is the guy who's in form. This is our potentially best batter, or one of our best 2 or 3 batters at least. Let's give him the best time to bat and be super flexible. Australia's philosophy, to the extent they have one, has always been about pragmatism under McDonald and Cummins, and I think that'll continue this week.
Yeah, limited sample sizes, but we do generally get the sense that with pink ball test matches, when the ball is old and it's not in that twilight period, it actually can be very good to bat. Yeah, so you can see why Australia would look to almost hide Head from the harder conditions. Just finally, Matt, are people talking about sunset times much in Australia? I've seen that sunset is like an hour 40 earlier in Brisbane than Adelaide, which just means the twilight period is an hour 40 early. I actually was wondering yesterday, does that mean it actually falls exactly during the tea break? And then we've all been thinking this, and none of it actually matters in the end.
So, right, there's a couple of answers in there. So Root was talking about it 2 days ago, and I think comparing it to the most recent pink ball game that England played, which was at Mount Maunganui, I think sunset is significantly earlier, and there's some thought that the moment where the artificial light starts taking over could be as early as midway through the second session, because the second session is going to be, I think the longer break is first, so it's 4:40 till 6:40 local time. Sunset has been it'll be around the end of that session, but obviously, the twilight period will be sometime there. It's generally been slightly later, I think, in England's previous pink ball tests. The other element to mention is just that Brisbane appears to be on like a completely baffling time zone, in that it's been absolutely bright sunshine by 6 a.m. and I keep waking up every morning because the sun's getting in through the blinds at 6. And it's an hour time difference from Melbourne and Sydney, which feels completely frivolous and needless. So I'm told reliably by Daniel Norcross of the BBC that there was a referendum on this a few years ago, and there were some extremely weak arguments presented about what an extra hour of sunlight would do to people's curtains, which appeared to have been completely flipped the wrong way around. And the effect that it may or may not have on cattle and farmers. So I think it's usual bizarre stuff that we'll be talking about over the course of the next week. And yeah, the longer that the build up for this test goes on, the more sort of I'm desperate for there to be a bit more cricket after we've had 6 sessions. And I've only been in Australia for 2 weeks, I think, but some people have been here for coming up for a month and slowly losing their minds on the build-up of yet another test that hopefully will last a little longer.
I can see the headlines already. Poms bash frivolous time zones as they go 2-0 down in Brisbane. Well, Matt, cheers for your time. And yeah, let's hope there's more than 6 sessions of cricket in the next week.